This video contains spoilers for the game Alien Isolation, and also minor spoilers for the film series. Amnesia: The Dark Descent started a trend in 2010. The game focused on gameplay in which the player was forced to hide from the roaming monsters dubbed the Grunts. The game quite literally does not contain any weapons which the player can utilize against the roaming monsters. Therefore, the emphasis of the game became hiding, learning the patrol patterns of the monsters, and in the worst case scenario, running for your dear life. This video is not about Amnesia. It's about a game that learned from that hide-and-seek philosophy of gameplay and inserted it into another property extremely well known to fans of horror. Welcome to Alien Isolation.
Signing off.
We all know the infamy of film adaptations of video games. There is an inherent difficulty in transforming an interactive narrative into an uninteractive one. Case in point, Silent Hill uses the visual language of the series, but lacks the emotional feel that the player experiences while playing the games. It also fundamentally misunderstands the thematic significance of the monsters inhabiting Silent Hill. I'm getting off track complaining about Silent Hill, and that's totally justified, I suppose, but the main point is this. Film adaptations often lack the substance that drew the fans to the original game in the first place. The track record of video game adaptations based on films is similarly maligned, although there are a few notable bangers, those being Scarface: The World Is Yours, The Godfather, and probably the Lord of the Rings video game from my childhood, the name of which I can't remember. I guess it's just Return of the King. The differences between video game adaptations of film and film adaptations of video games aren't comparable at all. When adapting a video game into a film, the player is reduced to a viewer, with the player input disappearing altogether. In this setting, the narrative becomes the main element. On the contrary, video game adaptations of film force player input into stories that have already been told. This might be a bit jarring when Wolverine is defeated by random soldier number 136 when the player decides to go fetch a tang from the fridge without pausing 2009's X-Men Origins Wolverine. That's oddly specific, but my point stands. A general assumption here is that in film, the narrative is king, whereas in video games, the gameplay takes center stage. On the video game adaptation side, the ideal would be a marriage between gameplay and narrative that immerses the player into the world of the film, creating a scenario in which the player is given free rein in a world that was uninteractive previously. This is the exact reason I wanted to write about Alien Isolation. It is by far the most I have ever felt immersed into a world that I have already experienced through uninteractive means. The way that Creative Assembly was able to recreate the world of Alien in interactive form is nothing short of astounding. Like actually stunning. Notably, Alien Isolation is not a straight adaptation of any of the films in the series. A more accurate description would say that it is an interactive spin-off of the main Alien franchise. It does, however, have more in common with Alien and Aliens, rather than the film series from Alien 3 to Alien Covenant, including Prometheus. The game developers have stated that the original Ridley Scott Alien served as the main inspiration for the game, although some elements are clearly borrowed from Aliens. Not a fan of the title of this sequel, by the way, like it makes talking about the film so difficult, because is it like aliens plural, like there are many aliens, but I mean that's the point of the second film, but okay, whatever. Before I can dissect what makes the atmosphere of Alien Isolation so special, I will have to discuss the game's different systems a bit. Alien Isolation takes place on a space station much larger than the original Alien. Sevastopol, the station in question, holds many different locations, such as tram stations, a medical bay, a command center, a synthetics department, a police station, etc., etc. And by the way, that's not even taking into account the numerous places you can go, quote-unquote, outside in this game. Sevastopol is essentially a mobile city in space. The thing that it reminds me the most of is without a doubt the space station Sprawl in Dead Space 2, which also had many interesting locations that the player could explore during their visits. The player steps into the shoes of Ripley. This time, however, the protagonist is not the legendary Ellen Ripley, but her daughter Amanda Ripley. The two's personalities and traits are incredibly similar, but I suppose that makes sense plot-wise and provides a great way for the narrative to link to the events of the film series. I mean, just like me, my mother is a film enthusiast who loves to think that she's right about everything. When Ripley arrives on the station, the trouble has already begun. Communications have been completely cut off by the mainframe artificial intelligence called Apollo. Some parts of the station are completely dark, lacking electricity, hallways are on fire, and a certain feeling of eeriness hangs in the air. The residents of Sevastopol are hiding, carrying weapons, defending themselves, and most importantly, surviving. It is quite obvious from the get-go that something has gone terribly wrong on the station. At the beginning of this essay, I brought up Amnesia: The Dark Descent and how that game managed to strip away the player from any means of self-defense. Alien Isolation is not like that. I keep doing that, by the way, like, oh my god, they're different games, who would have thought? They looked entirely similar. Ripley actually has quite an assortment of weapons, tools, and equipment that she can use during her stay on Sevastopol. Each has their own use case, which we will get to later, and limited resources. There are also many different items that can be crafted by collecting resources on the station. Being the space engineer that she is, Ripley can build noisemakers, smoke bombs, flashbangs, EMPs, pipe bombs, and even Molotov cocktails. Which, by the way, require sensors and batteries. Like, what? Why? Are you kidding me? Like, my ancestors were in the Winter War. They did not require World War II era batteries. For those, you just need alcohol, which Finland has plenty of, and rags, and I suppose fire. Anyway, all these items have their own use case, just like the weapons. Additionally, Ripley can craft medkits to heal herself and pick up flares to, well, I don't exactly know what the function of these things is. These different weapons and items are utilized to dispatch the enemies that are aboard the station. The game has a few different enemy types, which we will go over now. The humans. Amanda Ripley is far from the only survivor aboard Sevastopol. Human NPCs can be seen on Sevastopol, roaming the halls, sometimes neutral towards Ripley, other times hostile. This all functions on the basis that the now failed Sevastopol has limited resources. People are fighting for space to live. No pun intended there. Factions have begun to spread around the survivors, with notable number of them living in Sanctuary, which is where, conveniently, all the children are also. On the topic of children, it is notable that this game does not have any. I suppose it would be rather traumatizing to see a bunch of children ripped to shreds by the... Anyway, the humans are fairly squishy and therefore can be dealt with a simple revolver shot to the head, a stun baton, or if you are feeling particularly sadistic, with a pipe bomb. There is also a clear option to simply avoid the humans, which the game heavily nods towards by telling you that Ripley is not a violent person, but will defend herself if needed. Furthermore, all encounters with the human enemies don't end up in a revolver duel. Most of the human NPCs that I encountered told me sternly to back off, which I did, leading them to become neutral again. This adds brilliantly to the immersion of the narrative. These people aren't murderers either. The situation is simply forcing them to act so. The game's introduction to the humans as a type of enemy is done rather brilliantly. Our first real interaction on the station is when we are ambushed by a lone survivor. This guy is called Axel. Axel is a tad paranoid, as he has been living on the station throughout the downfall of Sevastopol. Surprisingly, the first NPCs that we meet with Axel are actually friendly. The introduction would then imply that perhaps the game doesn't even have hostile human NPCs. This, however, changes when we encounter a group of humans who have holed up nearby. These enemies will shoot you on sight, which can also be gleaned from their dialogue. These interactions build the foundation for all encounters with human NPCs in the game. Axel serves as the narrative conduit for the current status of the humans on board Sevastopol. Tensions are high and paranoia has set in. Tribes have been formed to survive on a daily basis. Some humans are neutral and understand the plight of the survivor, others will defend their territory and resources by force. It is also very fitting that Axel meets the same fate as most of the humans that you encounter in the game. The androids. Humans are far from the main threat on the station. A more menacing presence looms in the halls of Sevastopol. This enemy type is without a doubt the most difficult to deal with. These enemies are bald neck snappers that talk at inappropriate times called Joe. But enough about Joe Rogan. let's focus on Alien Isolation.
This feeling of being attacked by this thing that's been grooming me. Yeah, it's like, what is that? Like, well, if there are...
Okay, so that's a joke. Anyway, the working Joes are a pain. Just like in the original film, they can lift 90 times their own weight, are tough to kill, and do weird stuff to you after you expire. To combat these enemies, the player can either stun them with an EMP or a stun baton, or take them out the traditional way. The latter option does have its problems though, as the working Joes take around 5 to 6 revolver shots to the head. Luckily, Ripley does find a shotgun, which essentially one-shots the average working Joe. This changes, however, when the game goes ahead and introduces the Super Joes later into the narrative. These upgraded versions are conveniently wearing hazmat suits, which are impervious to shotgun shells, because getting blasted with a shotgun was apparently a worry for the Sevastopol engineers. Naturally, the player can also sneak around the Joes, but these enemies are relentless. Once they spot you, they begin to walk towards you like they are the grandma from It Follows. It takes a good while before they lose aggro. One working Joe is fairly easy to avoid, but 2 or 3, it starts to get a bit tricky. And that's not even accounting the... Okay, I guess I can't avoid it any longer. The main threat aboard Sevastopol is not the humans or the androids. It's Steve. Steve the alien. I do recognize how futile it is to hide the main antagonist of the game, as it is called, well, you know, Alien Isolation. However, this was totally necessary, as it would have distracted me from the other elements of the game. Why? Because the Xenomorph, despite its technical marvel, is without a doubt the most frustrating thing about this game. Let's go back to the beginning. The introduction to the alien is very neat. It takes out Axel in a very cinematic fashion. Afterwards, there is a very oppressive section in which you are waiting for a tram while also being bombarded with the soundtrack. You can clearly hear the Xenomorph scream and rummage around the vents. Contrary to common belief, if you stick around this section for too long, the alien will actually pop out of the vent and take you out. However, this will not be the experience for most players, as, well, you know, you actually want to avoid the alien. Then, surprisingly, the alien does not appear for a while. However, the game has implanted the idea that the creature might appear at some point. The dread is in the player's head. The game's introduction to the alien is similar to Jaws, in the sense that we can see what it can do from the very beginning, but it only becomes a present danger later on. Then, after an hour or so, the alien actually appears. This marks the ending of Alien Isolation's introduction. From this point on, the alien will actively hunt you. In this section, Ripley has to avoid the alien without the use of the most common tools in Alien Isolation. It's intense, but still fairly forgiving. This section also introduces the player to a common mechanic in the game: hacking doors while evading the alien. The game is filled with these small minigames. I won't spend too much time describing each one, as there is a healthy variety of them throughout the game, but the most common one is a minigame in which you use your hacking tool to pick a series of different symbols that match the pattern above it. It's painfully easy, but that's the purpose. This game mechanic only becomes interesting when the player is put under pressure. You have to match these icons while also being hunted by the alien. Notably, this pressure is also present when the player is avoiding the androids and the human characters. Anyway, back to the first alien encounter. Ripley manages to avoid the alien and backtrack to a place where a group of human enemies were encountered 10 minutes prior. It's quite satisfying to see the alien decimate these enemies, which were such a hassle just moments prior. This section also shows a core mechanic in the game. The human enemies can lure the alien. Therefore, avoiding the humans becomes vital, as Ripley is not the only character that the alien is interested in. A fight with the human enemies can also lure the alien, making it a dangerous situation for everyone involved. There's a major issue with this, but we will return to it later. The alien's design is very cool. Its thumbs are weighty, creating the illusion that it is large and can probably rip you in half. I also really like the fact that it drags a tail behind it and that the developers created different animations for it. For example, it goes up when it attacks, just like a hecking chunker. The alien is, however, notably stiff. Its walk animation is the one that it sticks with for the rest of the game. The alien that you see in this first scene is the alien that you will be stuck with for the rest of the game. After this encounter, Ripley finds arguably the most useful tool in the game. The motion tracker is a deliberate callback to the first two films in which the alien is being tracked by using similar tools, except in second it's aliens, but let's not get into that kerfuffle once again. This thing is essentially your left hand. You will use this thing more than an influencer uses Social Blade. You will use this motion tracker in every single level of the game constantly. I mean, you don't have to use it, but good luck keeping track of the alien without it. I have a love-hate relationship with the motion tracker. On the one hand, it's very neat that the game gives you this tool as it immerses you into the world of Alien. You are Ellen Ripley looking at the scanner while Dallas is in the vents. You can even choose to focus on the foreground or the background while using the tracker. You genuinely get to relive some of the most iconic scenes in the Alien films. The motion tracker makes the game much more playable compared to just avoiding the alien or listening to its steps. I would go as far as to say that the tracker is required for the game, as the alien would be far too punishing otherwise. On the other hand though, you are very dependent on the motion tracker. It's very similar to detective mode in Batman Arkham Asylum. The game requires for you to use the mechanic so often that it's just easier to leave it on by default. Notably, this is an imperfect comparison as you can still engage in combat while in detective mode, whereas Alien Isolation requires the player to switch weapons for the combat, but the general idea is similar. You should always be using your motion tracker. Alien Intelligence. In the previous section I noted that the xenomorph is the most frustrating thing about this game. A major contributing factor to that is its artificial intelligence. Before I progress any further from that statement, I should mention that I have zero experience in games development. My understanding of how the alien works in this game is solely based on, number one, and most important I would say, playing the game, and two, watching videos explaining how it works. Shout out to the channel AI and Games for their magnificent Alien Isolation videos, by the way. The important distinction here is that I am discussing how Alien Isolation feels to play rather than how it is programmed, which is also the experience that most people will have with the game. The main gameplay loop after the first real alien encounter follows a pattern. The player will enter a room and look at what kind of enemies they are facing. Most of the time, the player will hear rummaging in the vents and notice a notable dot on the motion tracker indicating that something is moving although nothing is seen. This means that the alien is active nearby, which also means that running, the use of firearms, and overall chicanery is strictly forbidden. Why, you may ask? Well, the alien is attracted to noise and will follow it. Therefore, if the player chooses to utilize firearms or try to save time by running, they place themselves into a risky scenario. The alien might pop out of the vent, run towards you, and take you out instantly. Outside scripted events, nearly all interactions with the alien end in an instant death. There are notable differences between how the xenomorph in Alien Isolation functions and how, for example, the grunts function in Amnesia: The Dark Descent. The grunts in Amnesia are triggered by set story events, i.e. the player picking up an item or by encountering them in roaming mode. The roaming mode essentially means that the grunts are stumbling around the level with their cone of vision up. If the player is spotted in said cone of vision, the grunt will chase. In comparison, the xenomorph in Alien Isolation is far more sophisticated. It does appear at some trigger points, i.e. the player walking to a specific area or flipping a switch, but most of the times these instances are indistinguishable from the times that it randomly approaches the player. Interestingly enough, according to NoClip's documentary in which they interviewed the developers of this game, one of the developers mentioned that the main basis of the alien is that it would pop out every few minutes, so you wouldn't get this respite from the horror. So it's kind of hard-coded into the way that the alien interacts with the world that it will eventually pop out of the vents and chase you down. There are a few problems with this, and I'll get to that a bit later. The roaming mode of the alien is split between front stage and backstage time, in which the alien is either in the vents or roaming the level on foot with its cone of vision up. When the alien is in the vents, the player will utilize the motion tracker to keep track of where it is going. There is always a chance that the alien might pop out of the vent randomly, but then again, if the player doesn't give it a reason to do so by running or shooting firearms or banging on pipes with the wrench, it might not do so. I think the most important distinction here is that the alien might pop out of the vent. This is on purpose, as the alien's artificial intelligence is that unpredictable. It will genuinely pop out of vents sometimes based on no evidence that the player is present. It does, however, feel like the alien constantly knows where the player is in proximity. It's not like you can outrun it, like it will always be there. It will always follow the player even when playing as quietly as possible. This makes the game immensely frustrating because it feels like the alien is attached to the player with a rubber band. The closer you are to it, the more it will search random areas. However, the further you go from it, the closer it will also follow you. I suppose the gameplay reason for this is that the player is meant to feel like they are being constantly hunted. That's good on paper. However, it leads to an experience which feels borderline unfair. Playing the game, you can see through the artificial intelligence's cracks. It always knows where you are, but some part of the programming is stopping it from finding you. I mean, that is until you mess up and either stumble into its cone of vision or make noise. This makes the alien feel like you are playing against a chess robot rather than a fun challenge, let's say. It doesn't feel like an actual creature. The alien always knowing where you are, mixed with the unpredictability of it, mixed with its insta-kill nature, naturally promotes player caution. Hiding in closets for copious amounts of time, sneaking constantly, never using 80% of the weapons that are available for the player. Thank God you can just kill the thing and be done with it. Oh wait, I didn't mention that part, did I? The alien in this game, just like the classic Ridley Scott masterpiece, is quite literally unkillable. So not only do the revolvers, the shotguns, etc. cause unnecessary noise that attracts the alien, they also do nothing to it. It should be noted that the shotgun does actually stun it momentarily, but the general idea is the same. The shotgun is never a long-term solution, and using it will require some other tool to be used as well. I mean, you can't just shoot the alien with a shotgun and then run away, for example. Like, it will 90% of the time know where you are. The only weapons that work to fend it off are the pipe bomb, the Molotov cocktail, and the flamethrower. The first two options are a bit unreliable, let's say, as they require crafting materials. Therefore, the player has to scour the levels to find them on the off chance that they will be able to create a weapon to defend themselves. Without these tools, however, the player can only hide or distract the alien. This can be, by the way, done with the noisemaker and the flare. In comes the iconic flamethrower. You receive the flamethrower surprisingly late into the game in Mission 10, which is 55.5% into the whole experience. This thing relies on fuel, which is fairly often found in the levels, and actually drives the alien back into the vents semi-regularly. What do I mean with semi-regularly? I mean, what does that mean? Well, when you first receive the flamethrower, the alien genuinely runs away from the flames. However, as the game goes on, the alien becomes less and less averse to it. This essentially means that the player should use it sparingly, just like every other goddamn weapon in this game. This adds another RNG factor into the game. The player does not know, quote-unquote, how averse to the flamethrower the alien is at each point in the game. I sometimes sprayed sparingly and the thing just tanked through it. Surprisingly, this element of the gameplay does not affect the alien's reaction to using Molotov cocktails. Those will consistently scare it away. That being said, you can actually miss the blueprint, which gives you the ability to craft Molotov cocktails. This led to a very, very, very frustrating experience in which I immediately realized that I should have the ability to fend for myself, but couldn't do so. Admittedly, the blueprint is not hidden or behind a puzzle or something like that, I just happened to miss it. When entering a room, the player will note the variety of enemies in that location. If the player is facing the working Joes and the alien, sneaking becomes the best option while also using noisemakers, EMPs, and the stun baton. Conversely, if the player is facing humans and the alien, sneaking and noisemakers are the best option. In a nutshell, most of the game's encounters begin with the player sneaking around, utilizing the motion tracker, and getting the general lay of the land. Afterwards, the player will progress to finding the objective in the level, which usually consists of finding a lever, a computer, or some other contraption that must be utilized to progress. This is the core gameplay loop, and well, it becomes rather boring after a while. That is not to say that there isn't variety in each encounter. The alien does not care about the androids in the slightest, leading to some very funny interactions between the two. There is a narrative reason for this as well, which we will get to later. The androids are much more difficult to deal with in comparison to the human enemies. Their ability to grab you will also make you clearly visible to the alien, creating very intense situations.
My turn now.
The humans are difficult to deal with in a whole different way. As you cannot shoot the humans, at the risk of attracting the alien, you have to sneak. When the human enemies spot you, they will generally take some pot shots at you. This leads to a very interesting scenario, as the alien will almost immediately pop out of the vent and take out whoever happens to be standing nearest it. That's right, the alien will not automatically go for the person shooting the gun, but the person that is nearest when it arrives on the scene. Therefore, distancing yourself from the shooter might just lead you to have a run-in with the alien, leading to an instant kill. I think this system is a tad problematic. The most sensible thing to do in this situation would be to hide from the shooter and the alien. However, this is not always a viable option, as sometimes there simply isn't a place to hide. In these cases, the game relies on RNG. You must run away, but doing so might also lead you to the alien. This can lead to situations in which it feels unfair that you have been killed, as the one person shooting the gun should be the person who gets gutted, not the player themselves. It does feel like the alien has a special interest in you specifically, rather than the other survivors on the station. It should be noted that if Ripley is the one shooting the gun, the alien will absolutely come for her rather than the other people in the room, which is kinda unfair in my opinion. From a narrative perspective, I guess it makes sense that all the inhabitants of Sevastopol are not aware that there is a xenomorph present on the station. Therefore, they genuinely might not be aware that shooting guns is genuinely a bad idea. In general, it just feels kinda annoying that the game deliberately gives you these firearms which look visually neat and sound amazing, and then restricts their use completely. As I did research for this video, I found out that the main design philosophy driving this game was that the game should focus more on survival horror than action. This is not surprising, as the previous Alien games have been adapted on the basis of aliens rather than the first film. Once again, I'm not a fan of that naming convention, but we're rolling with it. This design also led the developers to use the first-person perspective rather than the third-person over-the-shoulder perspective, which was extremely common during the time of development. Fun fact, there is even footage of the original version of the game, which was in third person, and I'll just say that it looks a bit familiar. The reason I bring this whole thing up is that I don't want to give the impression that I wanted a Dead Space game and received Alien Isolation instead. I'm really happy that I received a game which prioritizes stealth and distraction over gunplay. However, if you are going to make a game which prioritizes those things, make the systems crystal clear. Give me a clear visual on the cone of vision that the alien has. Implement more stealth mechanics. Stuff like that. Take away the guns. I can't use them anyway. I think the main problem with Alien Isolation's core gameplay loop is an over-reliance on sneaking mechanics. The game essentially strong-arms you to avoid running, shooting guns, and just making an overall ruckus. This wouldn't be an issue if the game was Metal Gear Solid, but Alien Isolation clearly did not set out to be a sneaking game. It is incredibly unclear when hallways are too dark for enemies to spot you. The player can mess with the air purification system of a room, causing it to be enveloped in smoke, which looks awesome by the way. This should, on paper, make you less noticeable. However, there is no visual cue to clue you in when you are hidden and when you are not. On the one hand, it's a good thing in the sense that it immerses you into a realistic experience. On the other, this makes the core gameplay loop very unpredictable and often very frustrating. It should also be mentioned that Alien Isolation utilizes in-game save points which have to be manually activated by the player. These are spread around the game quite generously, but often are missing in intense sections where the player has to avoid the alien. Therefore, if you are sneaking around a level, assume that the darkness is enough for the alien not to spot you, guess wrong and get maimed by it, then you will most likely be thrown to a save point from 10 minutes ago. I have no problem with difficult games, but there is a difference between creating a fun challenge and creating just frustrating circumstances. The alien's unpredictable movements in conjunction with the overall poor indication of when you are spotted and the save points being far and distant from one another in conjunction create an incredibly punishing experience. This would be the time to call it the Dark Souls of the survival horror genre if I were an actual game critic. If you want to play this game without ripping your hair out, you essentially have to reserve ammunition, collect all resources that are available, never use your firearms, never run, and stay in hiding places for extended periods of time. It is immersive, for sure. You are surviving an actual xenomorph infestation, but then again, it's not fun at all. The thing that I've noticed while writing this is that it does sound like I'm looking for a more action-oriented Alien game, which just couldn't be farther from the truth. I love that they took this chance to create an Alien game that actually has the player facing overwhelming odds just like Ripley in the original film. This adds to the immersion immensely. You are living through Alien. However, the randomness creates frustration because it does not feel like I, quote-unquote, messed up. It feels like the game went out of its way to punish me for trying to have fun with it. I am not being challenged, I'm just waiting for the chess master to make a mistake. In this sense, the game is extremely immersive until it decides to rip you out of the experience. I know many people will comment something along the lines of, well, Crits, it's a horror game, maybe it shouldn't be fun. And I have to disagree with that point, so allow me to clarify. Horror games are fun when they are scary. I love the feeling of dread that arises when I'm sneaking past an enemy that might suddenly pounce on me. What I don't like in horror games is when the game deliberately rips you out of it by killing you. It does frighten you a few times, but the effect becomes less and less effective each time. Alien Isolation is an 18-hour game. If you are being constantly killed by the alien during those 18 hours, you tend to become rather numb to the scares. Therefore, the game no longer serves its main function of being a fun horror game. Notably, this issue is not specific to Alien Isolation. Many different horror games have the same issue. But I could discuss more of this, but I want to keep this essay sort of concise. So I'll just say that horror games usually need to introduce new kinds of enemy types to keep the experience kind of scary, because getting killed by the alien for 18 hours kind of doesn't feel that scary when you're in, like, I don't know, 12 hours of the game. You kind of get numb to it. So, you know, that's just what I'm saying here. On the topic of immersion, the game deliberately makes you perform a number of menial tasks on the station. Break a lock, find a data cell, disable a security lockdown, restore communications with the torrents, find a keycard, fix an elevator, restore power, lock down the server farm, halt grid purge, etc, etc. I mean, you get the general idea. The game is built around Ripley running around the station fixing stuff. In that sense, it's very similar to a game that originally inspired the project, that being Dead Space. This doesn't make for a very good narrative, which we will cover in the next section. However, it solidifies the reason I wanted to write about this game. This game immerses you in the experience of being a space engineer. Almost everything you do in this game is not accessible with just a press of a button. For example, utilizing the maintenance jack requires the player to first press E on the prompt, then hold both mouse buttons, which are surrogates for Ripley's hands by the way, and then turn left. All of these different parts are animated, even to the extent that Ripley grabs the door lock and even drops it on the floor. Similarly, when Ripley uses the blowtorch, the player has to manually start the process with the E prompt and then guide the blowtorch around the vent block with the mouse. Now, you know that's a bit excessive, right? Yes, it is. But this is what makes the game so immersive for me. Alien Isolation does not confine to the common tropes of video games in which a single prompt leads to an elaborate animation in which your character pulls out a tool, utilizes it, and then puts it away. I know that this is a low-hanging fruit, and forgive me for using it, but it doesn't do the press F to pay respects thing that has become so synonymous with FPS games in the last 10 years. I mean, the bar isn't that high, to be honest. The reason these animations are so long and why player engagement is required is simple. It immerses the player into the world. A part of your survival is doing these things while also being under pressure by the alien. During my research, I encountered a common critique which said that these long animations artificially pad out the game's runtime. While factual as the animations literally do make the game longer, I do not agree that they are there to serve as a way to pad out the game, which would be very long even without them if you ask me. Another critique is that the minigames and the button prompts are quote-unquote brain dead, which, to be fair, is sort of accurate. I think this point displays that if you are not on the game's wavelength, the engineering parts will seem like monotonous busy work. I don't feel that way personally, but I can totally see where that critique comes from. By the way, just a side note, really quickly, I really do wish I could show different gameplay clips and critiques that people have of this game. I would love to show them, just to show that I'm not inventing this stuff. But the current DMCA landscape of YouTube really does scare me. I'm not gonna touch that thing with a long poker, if you know what I mean. That's not a word. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. While the engineering tasks increase the immersion, I do not understand their focus on the narrative. There's a reason I saved this section for last. Despite the game being a technical marvel on the graphics, sound design, atmosphere sides, the story is very lackluster. As I am writing this essay, it has been a week since I finished my third playthrough of the game. Describing the narrative from memory is difficult because there just isn't all that much there. While the Xenomorph might be the most frustrating thing about this game, the narrative is without a doubt the most disappointing. The narrative begins with Amanda Ripley receiving information that a black box from the Nostromo has been discovered. This information is given to her by Samuels, who, quote-unquote, works for the company. Let's put a pin in this and return to it. The Nostromo black box is very important to Amanda Ripley as it contains information about her mother. I wrote down Amanda, but it's Ellen Ripley. Well, anyway. We as the audience are most likely aware of Alien and Aliens and know that Ripley spends 57 years in stasis, not being able to return to her daughter. It should be noted that Ripley's daughter is only mentioned in a deleted scene in Aliens. I'm not a professional of the ACU, that being the Alien Cinematic Universe, so I won't comment if Amanda Ripley is canon, but I'll just say that watching all of the movies, it does seem like the canon is all over the place anyways. Anyway, we know that Ellen didn't return to her daughter because she had to battle the Xenomorph aboard the Nostromo. Amanda's viewpoint is that her mother just disappeared with the entire crew of the Nostromo. Naturally, she wants to know what happened and therefore she will chase after the black box. So this is the setup for the story. The call to adventure, if you want to get narratological about it. The rest of the narrative will most likely rest on Amanda's pursuit of the black box to find out what actually happened to her mother. That's the 2 first hours of the game. Amanda finds the black box, the contents have been corrupted, and after that, the game forgets its existence. A lot of people had a problem with this specific aspect of the narrative. I don't have a problem with it, to be honest. If that was the setup to get Amanda aboard Sevastopol, then so be it. What I do have a problem with, however, is that the game returns to these plot points 16 hours into the narrative.
The black box's contents are actually shown in the last 2 hours of the game in a cutscene that has ostensibly nothing to do with it. Ripley does not earn closure, she literally stumbles onto it. So, if the search for the black box isn't the focus of the narrative, then what is? Here's a rundown of the entire narrative. Ripley gets the call to adventure. She hops on the Torrens, heads to Sevastopol, spacewalk, goes Ari. Ripley meets Axel, who gets killed. She then reunites with Samuels and Taylor and has to find a medkit for Taylor, who was injured during the spacewalk. We explore the medical bay and have a brief interaction with Dr. Coleman, who also happens to be crooked, although this is only gleaned from optional audio tapes and emails. Ripley finds the medkit, returns to Taylor, and also meets Marshall Waits and Ricardo. We have a flashback to the time that Marlowe discovered the engineer ship on LB-426, which is also the planet that the original Ripley visits. Well, actually, she doesn't. Well, okay, that first movie's planet where the ship is. Ripley, Waits, and Ricardo hatch a plan to trap the alien and blow it into space. First attempt fails because Ricardo saves Ripley. Second attempt succeeds with Waits backstabbing Ripley. Ripley returns to the station. Androids have gone haywire and killed everyone in the office of the Colonial Marshals. Ripley follows Samuels to the synthetics department to find out what happened. Samuels sacrifices himself to communicate with Apollo. Ripley finds Apollo and explains that the alien specimen has been taken care of. Apollo disagrees and shows that there are plenty of xenomorphs still in the reactor core. Ripley traverses to the reactor core and blows it up. Ripley visits the NA Sidora, sees that Marlowe wants to blow up the whole station. Ripley finally sees her mother's black box recording. You see how late this comes in the game, by the way. Ripley restores communications to the Torrens. Ripley runs from the aliens, almost escapes station but is captured, wakes up, dodges high-speed trams, returns to the spaceship, goes into space, activates something, I don't know. I don't remember what it was, to be honest. Ripley boards the Torrens, but surprise surprise, there is another xenomorph on board. Ripley gets blown out of the airlock with the alien. Ripley floats in space until she is found. All of that takes over 18 hours of gameplay. So you could say that the focus of the narrative is survival in its broadest definition. In my initial draft for this essay, I wrote that Alien Isolation doesn't have a story. This is false. It does have a story, it's just not a very good one. It does seem that the bulk of the game is just built around go to X place to activate Y thing. Obviously, I'm not a developer on this game, so this is pure speculation on my part, but it feels like they made the areas of the game first and then just reverse engineered a story around those specific locations. Which is totally fine, by the way. If the story works, it works, regardless of how it came about. The story of Alien Isolation, however, does not work, as most of the time the player is just chasing objectives. Quite mindlessly. If the game commands me to fetch a glib-glarb drive to reactivate the slip space engine, I'm just going to follow the motion tracker's waypoint to the specific spot that has that. However, I am not emotionally invested at all in the task. It feels like busy work for the sake of busy work. And hey, fair is fair. There's a lot of minutiae in the world building and the characters that you meet. For example, there are numerous audio recordings and emails that flesh out Sevastopol as a very interesting location. That being said, they don't really build a cohesive narrative, which I was searching for in the main story of the game. A game that did this specific type of storytelling really well is the original BioShock. That game also had plenty of environmental storytelling with the audio tapes that the player could find. However, BioShock told small stories in each different place that you visited. The best known example, Fort Frolic, had this amazing character Sander Cohen who was trying to create an extremely morbid art collection. Another example, Arcadia had this small story section where you were trying to save the oxygen resources for the entire city. Ripley does meet people like Dr. Coleman, and we do get some background on his shady business dealings, but he is such a small character in the grand scheme of things that you kinda just forget about him. He doesn't leave an impression. I know that this example is not the best one, as BioShock is a very different game, and focuses solely on the different interesting bosses that the world of Rapture has to offer. However, it shows an example of how Sevastopol could have been a more interesting setting. Taking the same approach with Alien Isolation wouldn't have been the best choice, but I don't think that the pointless running around, performing menial engineering tasks serves as a very good narrative. It's immersive for sure, But then again, it does not leave an impression on the player. I wish the story spent more time fleshing out the side characters. Taylor, for example, is very comparable to Burke in Aliens, as she originally just seemed like a nice person, but is then revealed to be in the bag for the company. The problem here is that we meet her in the beginning, she's injured during the spacewalk, is ostensibly comatose, frees Marlowe, and then just dies. She has a character arc, but then again we learn so little about her that her death doesn't feel tragic at all. Another character that has a lackluster character arc is Samuels. This is the man who works for the company, by the way. Most Alien aficionados will immediately recognize that this android is working for Wayland, and therefore shouldn't be trusted. The game even teases his betrayal as he goes off to quote-unquote talk to Apollo, after which the androids turn haywire. This is clever, as it enforces the player's suspicion that Samuels might be one of the bad androids, closer to Ash rather than Bishop. This turns out to be false, as Samuels sacrifices himself so that Ripley can communicate with Apollo to stop the android carnage going on the station. So that's a nice subversion of Alien, right? I mean, yes, but Aliens already did this, 28 years prior to the release of this game. When Samuels dies, I got the feeling that the game wanted me to feel something. Like, it's beautiful that this artificial intelligence, which can experience life just like most humans, decides to sacrifice himself so that more people can survive. However, we just don't get to know Samuels in that way. I have no doubt that Creative Assembly had a massive love towards this source material. I think it's a genius move to have this story be centered around Amanda Ripley. I think the way that you can explore the Torrens and live out the fantasy of being a crew member on the Nostromo is very neat. I even like the section in which you visit LV-426, which is, well, just walking. That's why it's such a shame that the narrative of the game isn't stronger. This game had the atmosphere, arguably the most difficult element to pull off when transitioning from an uninteractive piece of media to an interactive one. Despite criticizing the gameplay mechanics, I would have put up with them if the narrative was compelling. It just isn't, unfortunately. Conclusions. Alien Isolation is one of the most immersive games I've ever played. When you step onto the Torrens and are given free rein to explore, it feels like a truly magical experience. It's without a doubt a feeling I had with this game and have not consequently had with any other. The combination of the visual and audio design, the graphics and the music is so strong that it outshines every other aspect in the game. I don't return to this game for the narrative or the gameplay, which honestly feels odd to say. I return to it to relive Alien, which is why I think it's such a tragedy that this game did not receive a sequel. I would have loved to see a more refined version of this core concept. Limit the weapons, give me more stealth options. Write a compelling narrative with characters that I care about. Except, they did make a sequel. I actually found out about this while writing this essay. There's a game called Alien Blackout, which is a mobile game. It's ostensibly a Five Nights at Freddy's game with some refined mechanics. It even canonically continues Amanda Ripley's story. It's just not the game that we wanted or the sequel that Creative Assembly deserved. Okay, that's all she wrote. There were a few things that I couldn't implement into this essay, so I'll list them off here. The game actually has screenplay prompts in the subtitles when Samuel sacrifices himself. I mentioned that Amanda is an engineer just like her mother. Apparently, she isn't. But hey, can we all applaud the technical prowess that Ellen Ripley has? I mean, come on, it's not that easy to blow up the Nostromo, and furthermore, she has a Class 2 rating driving a workloader. Okay, I'll concede this point. Okay. It's weird how the graphics in this game pop off in a magnificent way, but the cutscenes have the most janky facial animations. It's tough not to compare this to Dead Space 1, as both games center around an engineer that attempts to fix the entirety of a space station throughout an infestation of an alien lifeform. They're kinda similar, I'm not gonna lie. Just like Alien Isolation, Dead Space 1 also feels like a fetch quest to me. Dead Space does, however, have a compelling plot twist at the end. As far as games that do this better, in my opinion, BioShock is still up there. That game also has a plot twist, but I don't think the entire narrative hinges on it. I rewatched all of the Alien films after writing this script, and I was thoroughly surprised how bad most of the sequels are. It's actually mind-blowing how well Alien Isolation understood the vibe of the original film, considering that the sequels didn't. Like, why are 3 and Resurrection so brown in the color palette? It doesn't feel like Alien. People have pointed out that the fact that there are eggs on Sevastopol indicates that there also should be a queen. If I recall correctly, one of the developers pointed that there is a queen on the station. We, as the player, just never meet it. Good choice in my opinion, as the usage of the Queen Xenomorph has been very shoddy after Aliens. Overall, I applaud the developers for sticking with elements mostly from the first film. In hindsight, I realize how incomprehensible the narrative section of this video is for people that haven't played the game. However, in my defense, I edited this video with a computer that can barely run DaVinci Resolve. I've given up on this essay numerous times, but came back to it because I wanted to express how much of an achievement the atmosphere of this game is. If given the chance to do this again, I would probably spend less time complaining about the gameplay and focus more on the narrative. Video game narratives are difficult because what often seems to be the case is that the narrative comes in second after the gameplay. I alluded to this earlier by mentioning that gameplay is king in the world of video games. I also happened to watch Joseph Anderson's video on The Rise of Tomb Raider, in which he observed that the narrative is the thing that people playing the game will talk about after completing it. Therefore, although gameplay is king, the narrative is the queen who shouldn't be overlooked. There's a reason why people hail The Last of Us as one of the best video games of all time. Okay, anyway, I've rambled for too long as it is. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe for more content like this, and like the video and all the usual stuff. I don't have a Patreon because I don't think I'm at that level yet. I need to become better at this before I can ask for money. This is the first video essay that I ever completed, and I know that there are some baby's first video essay feeling stuff in the editing. So if you have any ideas on how I could improve as a writer or as an editor, please do tell me, politely if possible. Regardless, I did learn a lot from this, and I do wish to become better at this. I tried to complete this at the beginning of October, but I caught COVID for the first time, so I had to take some time off recording. That's also why I'm very nasal in some of the recorded parts here. Okay, that's enough rambling. Thank you seriously for watching. It does mean a lot to me, and yeah, I guess I'll see you in the next one. Thank you. Bye-bye.